In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, excitement buzzed in the air. It was the day of the annual shooting competition, an event that brought together marksmen from all over the region. The shooting range was alive with activity, rifles clinking, boots crunching on gravel, and voices mingling as competitors prepared for the challenge ahead. Among the crowd stood Sarah Miller, a woman who didn't look like she belonged there. She wore faded jeans, scuffed work boots, and carried a simple rifle case. Her presence barely registered with the others. Sarah had signed up for the competition on a whim, though it wasn't entirely random. For weeks she'd felt this nagging pull, a desire to revisit something she once loved but had left behind long ago. As a single mom balancing 2 jobs to support her young son, life hadn't left much room for hobbies or personal goals. But when she saw the flyer for the competition pinned to the community bulletin board, something inside her stirred. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was courage, or maybe it was just curiosity. Whatever it was, she decided to take the leap. The other competitors were easy to spot. They strutted around with expensive gear, sponsor logos plastered across their jackets, and an air of confidence that screamed professionalism. Some were veterans of the sport, while others were local legends. Then there was Sarah, standing quietly off to the side, blending into the background. No one approached her. No one asked about her story. To them, she was invisible, a nobody who probably didn't know the first thing about competitive shooting. Group of men nearby joked loudly, pointing at Sarah's plain outfit and shaking their heads. "What's she doing here?" One of them snickered. Another chimed in, "Probably thinks this is some kind of carnival game." Their laughter echoed across the range, but Sarah pretended not to hear. She focused instead on setting up her equipment, her hands steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. Truthfully, Sarah wasn't oblivious to the stares and whispers. She knew exactly what people thought of her, that she didn't belong, that she was wasting her time. But deep down, she also knew something they didn't. Years ago, before life got complicated, Sarah had been taught how to shoot by someone who truly understood the art of precision. Her father. A former Marine sniper, he had spent countless hours teaching her everything he knew. Back then, she'd been a natural, hitting targets most adults couldn't even see. But after her father passed away, she put those skills aside, burying them under years of hard work and responsibility. Now, standing at the edge of the shooting range, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Fear because she wasn't sure if she still had what it took. Determination because she owed it to herself and to her father to try. She glanced down at the rifle in her hands, its worn surface familiar yet foreign. Could she really compete against these seasoned professionals? Or would she embarrass herself in front of everyone? As the competition began, Sarah took a deep breath. She reminded herself why she was there, not for glory or recognition, but to prove something to herself. The doubters didn't matter. What mattered was the moment she stepped up to the line and let her actions speak louder than their words. Little did anyone know, this unassuming single mom was about to make waves in ways no one expected. Sarah's journey to the shooting range hadn't started that morning. It had begun years ago, in the quiet moments of her childhood. Growing up, guns weren't just tools or weapons in her household. They were a connection to her father, a man who lived and breathed marksmanship. A former Marine sniper, he carried himself with a calm authority that commanded respect. To Sarah, he was larger than life, a hero in every sense of the word. And from the time she could hold a rifle steady, he made it his mission to teach her everything he knew. Her earliest memories were filled with weekends spent at a small, secluded range tucked deep in the woods behind their house. Her father would set up targets, sometimes cans, sometimes paper cutouts, and patiently guide her through the basics. "It's not about strength," he'd say, adjusting her grip. "It's about focus, control, and trust in yourself." He drilled into her the importance of breathing, posture, and patience. Miss a shot? That was fine. What mattered was learning from it. Over time, Sarah began to excel. By the age of 12, she could hit targets most adults struggled with. Her father beamed with pride, often telling her, "You've got a gift, kiddo. Don't ever let it go." But life has a way of pulling people in different directions. As Sarah grew older, responsibilities piled up. School, friendships, and eventually work took precedence. When her father passed away unexpectedly during her early 20s, it felt like a piece of her identity vanished with him. The rifles stayed locked away, gathering dust in the corner of her closet. She threw herself into raising her son, juggling jobs as a waitress and a freelance graphic designer to make ends meet. Shooting became a distant memory, something she occasionally thought about but never acted on. That changed recently. One evening, while sorting through old boxes in her attic, Sarah stumbled upon an old photo album. Flipping through its pages, she found pictures of herself as a child, standing proudly next to her father, holding a rifle almost as tall as she was. There were ribbons and medals tucked between the pages, mementos of competitions she'd forgotten about. Staring at those images, she felt a pang of longing. Not for the trophies, but for the sense of purpose and confidence she used to have. It was then that she decided to sign up for the competition. At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. Who was she kidding? She hadn't held a rifle in over a decade. But the more she thought about it, the more determined she became. This wasn't just about reliving old memories. It was about proving something to herself. Could she still do it? Could she step back into that world and hold her own? More importantly, could she honor her father's legacy by showing that his lessons hadn't been forgotten? Signing up for the competition felt like stepping off a cliff. She didn't tell anyone, not her friends, not even her son. Partly because she feared they'd laugh, partly because she wanted to see if she could actually follow through. On the day of the event, as she drove to the range, doubt gnawed at her. Was this a mistake? Would she embarrass herself in front of strangers? What if she couldn't hit a single target? Yet beneath the fear was a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she still had what it took. After all, her father's voice echoed in her mind, clear as if he were standing beside her. Focus, control, and trust in yourself. Those words became her mantra as she approached the range, ready to face whatever came next. Whatever happened, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone else. She was there for herself, and for the man who had taught her how to aim true. As Sarah moved through the bustling crowd at the shooting range, she couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and smirks directed her way. The seasoned competitors were easy to spot. They carried themselves with an air of confidence, their gear gleaming under the morning sun. Some wore jackets adorned with sponsor logos, while others had customized rifles that looked more like works of art than tools. In contrast, Sarah's plain appearance drew attention for all the wrong reasons. A group of men near the registration table openly laughed as they watched her unpack her rifle. "Look at this," one of them said, loud enough for her to hear. "She probably doesn't even know how to load it." Another chimed in, "Bet she signed up thinking it's some kind of fun day out." Their laughter echoed across the range, sharp and mocking. Sarah kept her head down, focusing on assembling her equipment. She knew better than to let their words get to her. After all, she'd faced far worse in life, but the sting was still there. Even the reigning champion, Ethan Grayson, joined in on the ridicule. Known for his cocky demeanor and unmatched skill, Ethan was a force to be reckoned with. He strutted around the range like he owned it, his expensive rifle slung over his shoulder. When someone pointed out Sarah's name on the roster, Ethan scoffed. "Another amateur," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "This is going to be over before it starts." His dismissive tone spread through the crowd, reinforcing the notion that Sarah didn't belong, but not everyone shared the same opinion. At Tabi, few curious onlookers noticed something different about her. While most newcomers fidgeted or seemed overwhelmed, Sarah moved with quiet purpose. Her hands were steady as she adjusted her rifle, and there was a calm intensity in her eyes that hinted at hidden depth. One older competitor, a retired Army veteran named Marcus, observed her from afar. "She's either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish," he remarked to a friend. "Either way, I want to see what she can do." Despite the whispers and jeers, Sarah refused to let the negativity weigh her down. She reminded herself why. She was here, to honor her father's memory and prove something to herself. Still, the pressure mounted as the competition drew closer. Every snicker, every condescending glance felt like another brick added to the wall of doubt surrounding her. Could she really hold her own against these professionals? Or would she crumble under the weight of their expectations? As the first round approached, Sarah took a moment to center herself. She closed her eyes, blocking out the noise around her, and focused on her breathing. In her mind, she replayed her father's lessons, the steady rhythm of inhale and exhale, the importance of staying present, and the reminder that true strength came from within. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased, replaced by a quiet resolve. Whatever happened next, she told herself, she would face it head on. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the mockery swirling around her only fueled her determination. Each laugh, each insult lit a small fire inside her, a drive to show them they were wrong. She wasn't there to entertain or impress anyone. She was there to compete. And as she stepped up to the line for her first shot, she silently vowed to give it everything she had. The doubters could say what they wanted, for now the range belonged to her. The moment Sarah stepped up to the firing line, the atmosphere shifted, though no one realized it yet. The crowd, still buzzing with laughter and casual chatter, barely paid attention as she positioned herself. To them, this was just another amateur about to embarrass herself. Some even turned away, assuming her attempt wouldn't be worth watching. But Sarah didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't care. She was in her own world now, a place where distractions faded and only the target mattered. She began by going through the motions her father had drilled into her years ago. Feet shoulder-width apart, body relaxed but balanced. She adjusted her grip on the rifle, ensuring it felt natural in her hands. Then came the breathing, slow, deliberate inhales and exhales that steadied not just her body but her mind. Every movement was precise, almost ritualistic, as though she were reconnecting with a long-lost part of herself. The murmurs around her quieted slightly. Even the skeptics couldn't help but notice the calm focus radiating from her. When Sarah finally raised the rifle, something remarkable happened. Her posture transformed. Gone was the unassuming woman who had arrived earlier, blending into the background. In her place stood someone entirely different, someone confident, composed, and utterly focused. The rifle seemed like an extension of her arm, perfectly aligned with her gaze. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. The chatter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Then, with a steady breath, she pulled the trigger. The crack of the shot echoed across the range, sharp and clear. For a split second, there was nothing but the sound hanging in the air, and then gasps erupted from the crowd. Spectators craned their necks, trying to get a better look at the target. What they saw left them speechless. The bullet had struck dead center, slicing through the bullseye with pinpoint accuracy. Not only that, but the shot had shattered the previous record score held by none other than Ethan Grayson himself. A hush fell over the range, followed by a wave of disbelief. People exchanged glances, unsure whether to applaud or question what they'd just witnessed. Even Ethan, who had been leaning casually against a nearby table, straightened up in shock. His jaw tightened as he stared at the target, his confidence visibly shaken. Beginner's luck, he muttered under his breath, though the words lacked conviction. For Sarah, the moment was surreal. She lowered the rifle slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Part of her expected to wake up any second, convinced this was all some elaborate dream, but the cheers beginning to ripple through the crowd told her otherwise. Strangers who had mocked her earlier now clapped hesitantly, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. A few even approached her, offering hesitant congratulations. Despite the sudden attention, Sarah remained grounded. This wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about proving something to herself. As she glanced at the target, she allowed herself a small smile. That single shot wasn't just a display of skill, it was a message. To the doubters, to the critics, and most importantly, to herself. It said she belonged here. But the victory was short-lived. The whispers started again almost immediately. How did she do that? One competitor asked suspiciously. Another suggested her rifle might have been modified or tampered with. Ethan, unable to hide his frustration, stormed off toward the officials demanding an inspection of her equipment. Sarah ignored them all, focusing instead on preparing for the next round. She knew the hardest part was yet to come, but for now she let herself savor the moment. One perfect shot had changed everything, and she was ready to see where it would take her next. The initial shock of Sarah's first shot began to wear off, but the ripple effects were far from over. As the competition progressed, the atmosphere grew tense, charged with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Her flawless bullseye had silenced the doubters for about 30 seconds, but it also stirred something deeper: suspicion. Whispers spread like wildfire among the competitors. How could someone who looked so out of place deliver such a perfect shot? Accusations started flying, some subtle, others not so much. Ethan Grayson, still reeling from having his record shattered, couldn't let it go. He approached Sarah during a brief break between rounds, his jaw clenched and his tone dripping with disdain. "Nice trick," he said, his voice low but loud enough for nearby spectators to hear. "What's the deal? Did you rig your rifle? Or something?" Sarah looked up at him calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. She didn't respond right away, letting the weight of his accusation hang in the air. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and measured. "If you're that worried about my gear, feel free to check it yourself." Her calm response only seemed to infuriate him further. Ethan gestured dramatically toward the officials, demanding they inspect her equipment. The request drew a small crowd, eager to see how this unexpected drama would unfold. 2 judges examined Sarah's rifle thoroughly, checking every inch for modifications or irregularities. Meanwhile, Sarah stood silently, arms crossed, watching as the spectacle played out around her. Inside, though, doubt crept in. Was this really worth it? Could she keep pushing forward when everyone seemed determined to tear her down? When the inspection concluded, the head judge announced the results. Sarah's rifle was completely standard, no tricks or enhancements. The crowd murmured again, this time with a hint of reluctant admiration. Even Ethan had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. "Fine," he snapped, turning on his heel. "Let's see if you can do it again." And that was exactly what Sarah intended to do. But proving herself once wasn't enough, not in a competition like this. The next rounds tested not just skill but endurance. Targets became smaller, distances longer, and conditions tougher. Wind picked up, rustling through the trees and making each shot more challenging. Sarah struggled at times. No one was perfect, and she missed a few shots that left her frustrated. Each error brought fresh waves of whispers. "See? Beginner's luck," someone muttered. Another chimed in. "She got lucky once, but she won't last." The pressure mounted, and for a moment Sarah wondered if they were right. Doubt gnawed at her. What if that first shot really had been a fluke? What if she couldn't keep up with the professionals? But then she remembered why she was here. This wasn't about silencing critics or winning trophies. It was about honoring her father's memory and rediscovering the strength she'd buried under years of hard work and sacrifice. Every missed shot taught her something new, and every successful hit reminded her of the lessons etched into her soul by her father's patient guidance. By the time the 3rd round rolled around, Sarah found her rhythm again. She blocked out the noise, the snickers, the sideways glances, and focused solely on the task ahead. One breath, one shot at a time. Slowly but surely she climbed back into contention, matching scores with even the top competitors. The crowd began to take notice, their skepticism giving way to grudging respect. They couldn't deny it anymore. Sarah Miller wasn't just holding her own. She was excelling. Still, the hardest challenges lay ahead. With each round, the stakes grew higher, and the margin for error smaller. Sarah knew she couldn't afford another slip-up. As she prepared for the final stages of the competition, she reminded herself of her father's words: focus, control, and trust in yourself. Those words echoed in her mind, steadying her nerves and fueling her determination. Whatever came, next she was ready, or at least she hoped she was. As the competition moved into its later stages, the challenges became grueling tests of skill, endurance, and mental strength. The targets were no longer stationary circles on a board. They were moving, shifting, and appearing at unpredictable intervals. Some popped up briefly before disappearing again, leaving competitors scrambling to adjust their aim in seconds. Others were placed at extreme distances, requiring not just precision but also the ability to account for wind, light, and even the subtle tremors in one's own hands. For Sarah, this was where the real battle began. The first few shots of these advanced rounds didn't go as smoothly as she'd hoped. A gust of wind threw off her aim, causing her bullet to graze the edge of a target instead of hitting dead center. Another time, she hesitated a fraction of a second too long, missing a fast-moving target entirely. Each mistake felt like a punch to the gut, especially with the crowd watching so closely. The same people who had mocked her earlier now scrutinized, her every move waiting for her to falter. "Told you," someone muttered under their breath. "She's losing steam." But Sarah refused to let frustration take over. Instead, she leaned into the lessons her father had taught her years ago. When things got tough, he always said, "Mistakes are just opportunities to learn." So, after each missed shot, she took a deep breath and analyzed what went wrong. Was it her timing, her stance, or simply a misjudgment of the conditions? Whatever it was, she corrected it before stepping up for the next attempt. Slowly, her confidence began to rebuild. What kept her going wasn't just determination, it was memory. Every time she lined up a shot, she imagined her father standing beside her, his calm voice guiding her through the process. "Focus on the moment," he'd say. "Don't think about the last shot or the next one, just this one." Those words became her anchor, pulling her back whenever doubt crept in. She reminded herself that she wasn't competing for glory or recognition. She was doing this for him, for the man who had believed in her when no one else did. The turning point came during a particularly difficult round. The targets were set at varying heights and speeds, forcing competitors to constantly adjust and many struggled, including Ethan Grayson, whose usual swagger had faded into visible irritation. When it was Sarah's turn, she closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out everything around her, the whispers, the pressure, the weight of expectations. She visualized the path of the target, the trajectory of the bullet, and the exact moment they would meet. Then, with steady hands and unwavering focus, she fired 3 consecutive shots. Each one hit its mark perfectly, drawing gasps from the crowd. That performance silenced the skeptics, at least temporarily. Even Ethan couldn't hide his surprise, though he quickly masked it with a scowl. But Sarah didn't care about his reaction. What mattered was the growing sense of pride swelling within her. With every successful shot, she proved to herself that she belonged here, not because of luck or chance, but because of hard-earned skill and resilience. Still, the final rounds loomed ahead, promising even tougher obstacles. Sarah knew the road wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had something the others lacked: grit. While many competitors grew increasingly frazzled under pressure, she remained calm, drawing strength from the memories of her childhood and the love of a father who had shaped her into the person she was today. As she prepared for the ultimate test, she reminded herself of one simple truth. She hadn't come this far to give up now. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on, and with her heart fully in the game. The final round arrived, and the tension at the shooting range was almost unbearable. Only 3 competitors remained: Sarah, Ethan Grayson, and Marcus, the retired Army veteran who had quietly impressed everyone with his consistency throughout the day. The air buzzed with anticipation as officials set up the ultimate challenge, a series of moving targets placed at increasingly impossible distances. These weren't ordinary targets. They darted unpredictably, disappearing and reappearing in split seconds. It was designed to test not just skill but mental fortitude under pressure. As the finalists took their positions, the crowd gathered tightly around the range, craning their necks to catch every moment. Spectators whispered among themselves, speculating about who would come out on top. Most eyes were still on Ethan. He was the reigning champion after all, and his reputation preceded him. But there was no denying that Sarah had captured their attention too. Her earlier performance had silenced many doubters, though some still wondered if she could maintain her momentum. When it was Sarah's turn to shoot, the world seemed to narrow down to just her and the target. She blocked out the murmurs, the skeptical glances, and even the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Focusing solely on the task ahead, she steadied her breathing and adjusted her stance. One by one, the targets appeared, fast, erratic, and maddeningly elusive. Yet Sarah moved with precision, tracking each one with calm determination. Her first few shots hit their marks cleanly, drawing murmurs of approval from the crowd. But then came a curveball. A target zipped across the range at an angle so sharp it caught her off guard. Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, her finger hovering over the trigger. That brief pause cost her. The bullet grazed the edge of the target instead of hitting dead center. Groans rippled through the audience, and Sarah felt a pang of frustration. She knew how critical this moment was. A single missed shot could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Ethan seized the opportunity to regain his footing. His next shots were flawless, showcasing the arrogance and skill that had made him a champion. With each successful hit, he grew more confident, strutting slightly as if daring anyone to challenge him. Even Marcus faltered under the mounting pressure, missing 2 consecutive targets and effectively bowing out of contention. By the time the last target appeared, it was clear. The battle for first place would be between Sarah and Ethan. The final target was the toughest yet, a tiny disc moving at lightning speed along a zigzagging path. Both competitors stepped up to the line, knowing this shot could decide everything. Ethan went first, his movements brash and hurried. He fired and missed. The crowd gasped audibly as the bullet sailed past the target, leaving Ethan visibly rattled. Now all eyes turned to Sarah. This was it, the defining moment. Sarah closed her eyes for a heartbeat, shutting out the noise around her. She visualized the target's movement, imagining its path in perfect clarity. Then with slow, deliberate motions, she raised her rifle. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she lined up her shot, exhaled steadily, and pulled the trigger. The crack of the bullet echoed across the range, followed by a stunned silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting for confirmation. When the judges examined the target, they announced the result. Sarah Miller had hit dead center, securing her position as the winner. Cheers erupted from the crowd, louder and more enthusiastic than ever before. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened. Then, amidst the applause and congratulations, she allowed herself a small smile, not of triumph over others, but of quiet pride in proving something to herself. She had faced the toughest challenge of her life and emerged victorious. The moment the judges announced Sarah's victory, the atmosphere at the shooting range transformed. What had started as a day filled with whispers of doubt and mockery turned into an eruption of applause and admiration. Spectators who had once laughed at her now clapped enthusiastically, some even cheering her name. Strangers approached her to shake her hand, offering heartfelt congratulations. "That was incredible," one man said, his earlier skepticism replaced with genuine respect. Another woman added, "You've got guts, real talent too." For Sarah, it was overwhelming but deeply satisfying. Ethan Grayson, however, struggled to mask his frustration. He lingered nearby, arms crossed and jaw tight, as people surrounded Sarah to celebrate her win. When he finally stepped forward, his tone was begrudging but sincere. "You earned it," he admitted, though the words seemed to leave a bitter taste in his mouth. "I didn't think you'd make it this far, but good job." It wasn't the warmest acknowledgement, but coming from someone like Ethan, it carried weight. Sarah nodded graciously, choosing not to dwell on past animosity. Instead, she smiled softly, saying, "Thanks. I learned from the best." Though the accolades were nice, what truly mattered to Sarah was the sense of accomplishment she felt deep within. Winning the championship wasn't about proving herself to others. It was about honoring her father's legacy and rediscovering the strength she thought she'd lost. As she stood there holding the trophy, she couldn't help but imagine him watching from somewhere, beaming with pride. The lessons he'd taught her, focus, patience, resilience, had guided her through every challenge, just as they always had. The drive home that evening was quiet but meaningful. Her young son, who had been eagerly waiting for her return, greeted her with wide eyes and an excited grin. "Mom, did you win?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. Sarah chuckled, ruffling his hair as she held up the trophy. "Yeah, buddy, we did it together." She explained how hard the competition had been, how people doubted her, and how she pushed through despite everything. Her son listened intently, his admiration clear. "You're my hero," he declared, hugging her tightly. Those simple words meant more to Sarah than any medal ever could. Word of her unexpected victory spread quickly around town. Friends and neighbors who hadn't known about her participation reached out to congratulate her. Local newspapers ran stories about the single mom who defied expectations, turning her journey into an inspiring tale of perseverance. Sarah found herself becoming a role model, not just for aspiring shooters, but for anyone facing self-doubt or criticism. People began approaching her for advice, asking how she managed to stay so calm under pressure. Her answer was always the same: believe in yourself, trust the process, and don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't do. In the weeks that followed, Sarah returned to her routine, balancing work and parenting as she always had. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer saw herself as someone simply trying to get by. She saw herself as capable, strong, and unstoppable. Shooting became a regular part of her life again, not because she needed another trophy, but because it reminded her of where she came from and how far she'd come. Looking back on that day at the range, Sarah realized it wasn't just about winning. It was about breaking barriers, for herself and for others. She had walked onto that field as an outsider, dismissed and underestimated. She left as a champion, not because of her skill alone, but because of her determination to rise above negativity and prove that true strength comes from within. And as she tucked her son into bed that night, she whispered a promise to both of them. "We'll keep aiming higher, no matter what, because we're stronger than anyone gives us credit for."